Night was falling over the city, and the lights of the Imperial Hotel lit up like jewels scattered across the glass and marble facade. Inside, the grand ballroom was set for a luxurious event, with tables draped in silk cloths, crystal glasses sparkling, and elite guests mingling in expensive attire. It was the night of the Grand Charity Gala hosted by Arthur Montero, one of the richest and most influential businessmen in the country. Arthur, tall, imposing, and always surrounded by looks of admiration and envy, prided himself on the fortune he had built through his empire of investments and million-dollar deals. To him, the event was less about helping social causes and more about reaffirming his power, his position, his superiority before everyone. Among hurried waiters and vigilant security guards quietly circulated Clara, a young hotel maid. Dressed in a plain uniform, her hair tied back in a practical way, and hands calloused from hard work, she went unnoticed by most of the guests. Yet in her eyes was something few ever noticed: firmness, dignity, a spark that resisted even in the face of the wealthy's disdain. As she discreetly adjusted some chairs at the back of the hall, Clara heard Arthur's voice echo nearby. He was surrounded by businessmen, politicians, and heirs of traditional families. They laughed loudly, toasted, and spoke of deals involving figures the young maid could hardly imagine. Suddenly, one of the guests dropped a glass, spilling red wine across the imported carpet. Quick as ever, Clara grabbed the cloth she carried and stepped forward to clean it. That was when Arthur noticed her presence. He observed her for a moment, and a mocking smile curled on his lips. "Look at this," he said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. "This is the world we live in. Some of us are born to command, and others to clean the floor we stain." Laughter filled the air. Clara, her head bent down, kept scrubbing the carpet without saying a word. But Arthur didn't stop there. He stepped forward, held the now empty glass, and with a gesture of pure disdain, deliberately let it slip from his hand, shattering it right in front of her. "You don't belong in this world, girl," he declared, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You can clean all you want, but you'll never rise from where you are." The laughter echoed again. Some guests pretended to be uncomfortable, but no one dared to oppose the millionaire. Clara then lifted her gaze. There was pain in her eyes, yes, but also something few could see: the silent fire of someone who would not be broken by humiliation. She carefully picked up the shards of the glass, stood up, and without lowering her head, replied calmly, "You're right, sir. I don't belong in this world." She paused, staring straight into his eyes. "But maybe it's the world that isn't ready for me." An awkward silence fell over the table. Arthur narrowed his eyes, surprised that a maid had dared to respond. Then he let out a forced laugh and raised his glass again with his friends as if nothing had happened. But Clara knew, at that very moment, that she had planted the first seed. A seed of defiance, of something greater, something yet to come. While the ballroom sparkled with ostentation and laughter, behind the maid's discreet gaze a silent promise was born. One day, she would prove that man wrong. Clara grew up in a humble neighborhood, where the streets were unpaved and the houses stood side by side, built with effort and improvisation. Daughter of Donna Marta, a hard-working seamstress, and So Zhuang, a bricklayer who worked from sunrise to sunset, she learned early the value of effort and honesty. Her parents didn't have much to offer in material possessions, but they gave her something no money could buy: character and dignity. When she was only 13, Clara lost her father in a work accident. At that moment, the world seemed to collapse. Donna Marta, with her hands already worn out from sewing, couldn't support the house on her own. That's when Clara decided to drop out of school to help. At first, she worked doing small cleaning jobs, and later she got a steady job as a maid at the Imperial Hotel, where she quickly became known for her dedication and her ever-present smile, even in the face of hardship. Meanwhile, Arthur Montero's figure stood in stark contrast to hers. The only son of a powerful banker and a socialite used to luxury, He grew up surrounded by wealth and privilege. He attended international schools, spent seasons in mansions around the world, and from an early age learned that money could buy everything, or almost everything. Arthur had never known what it meant to fight for something. His father had handed him a consolidated fortune, and he merely expanded the business, often through questionable means. His arrogance came not only from success but from the belief that the world was divided between those who command and those who obey. The Imperial Hotel was, for him, a reflection of his power. He attended the most exclusive events there, always surrounded by politicians, businessmen, and figures of the elite. It was where he showed the world that he was at the top, and it was also there that his eyes met Clara's. Despite their worlds being so far apart, there was something about that young woman that unsettled Arthur. She didn't bow down like the others. Even while scrubbing floors, even while serving tables, her eyes carried a certain firmness. She wasn't submissive, only respectful. And for someone like Arthur, used to seeing everyone shrink in his presence, that was almost an affront. On Clara's side, her routine was marked by silence and observation. She cleaned rooms, organized hallways, but she also saw things. Drunken businessmen's conversations, secrets whispered at dinners, gestures of arrogance that revealed who those people truly were behind their expensive suits. And little by little, she built within herself the certainty that this world of luxury was not as untouchable as it seemed. There were also other important figures orbiting around this silent duel. Helena, Clara's best friend and fellow maid, was more resigned about life. She always said, "Clara, it's no use dreaming too high. People like us were born to serve." Clara would smile, but inside she kept the conviction that she could go further. Donna Marta, her mother, even sick, insisted her daughter should not give up on her studies. "One day, my daughter, this world will recognize who you really are." Ricardo, Arthur's right-hand man, was a cold executive, willing to do anything to protect his boss's image. He saw Arthur's rise as his own opportunity to grow rich and would go to any lengths to stay by his side. These characters formed the board where the silent battle began to unfold. Clara, with her humble origins and watchful eyes, stood in the invisible corner, while Arthur, with his empire and arrogance, placed himself at the center of attention. But it was precisely this invisibility that would give Clara an unexpected advantage. While Arthur flaunted his superiority, believing no one would ever dare challenge him, Clara observed, learned, and waited. Deep down, she knew life had prepared her to endure humiliation, but also to rise from it. And in her heart, she carried a silent promise. One day, she would show everyone, including the millionaire who despised her, that it wasn't the world that defined who she was, but her inner strength. The ball that night had been just the first clash. Arthur had thrown his words like arrows, but Clara hadn't backed down. And that would mark the beginning of a story where two opposite worlds would collide in an inevitable confrontation. The days after the ball went on as usual for many, but not for Clara. That cruel phrase spoken by Arthur echoed in her mind like a permanent challenge. "You don't belong in this world." Instead of breaking her, those words lit a flame that silently grew inside her. The morning after the event, Clara entered the Imperial Hotel early to prepare the rooms. As she tucked sheets and changed towels, her thoughts swirled between anger and determination. Every luxurious room, every polished piece of furniture, every golden detail seemed to remind her of the invisible line separating the haves from the have-nots. But unlike what Arthur believed, Clara refused to accept that her destiny was unchangeable. She began paying closer attention to the backstage of things. The hotel, with its ornate walls and silent corridors, hid secrets. Important guests left forgotten notes, torn contracts in the trash bins, muffled conversations behind half-open doors. Clara, with her almost invisible presence, witnessed it all. One day, she came across a newspaper left on the desk of one of the executive rooms. On the front page was an article about Arthur Montero, the magnate of clean fortune. Clara smirked with irony. She knew it was all a facade. She had seen politicians handing discreet envelopes to Ricardo, Arthur's right-hand man. She had overheard hushed arguments about illegally acquired land. The more she observed, the more she realized Arthur's empire was less solid than it seemed. That was when an unexpected figure entered her life. Miguel, a young intern in the hotel's administrative department. Unlike the others, he didn't treat her as invisible. One day, while Clara was organizing forgotten files in the maintenance room, Miguel walked in and smiled at her. "You always handle everything, don't you?" he said, helping her stack some heavy folders. Clara laughed, surprised by his kindness. Someone has to keep this place running, even if no one notices. Miguel wasn't rich, but he was studying law and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. He, too, distrusted Arthur and his businesses. Over time, their friendship grew. Clara began sharing small observations about what she saw in the corridors. Miguel, in turn, helped her interpret documents and legal terms she didn't understand. Meanwhile, Helena, her chambermaid friend, kept trying to dissuade her from meddling with the powerful. "Clara, you're going to get yourself burned. This world isn't for people like us." But Clara only smiled, as if holding on to a secret. Arthur, on the other hand, continued his routine of ostentation. Lavish meetings, parties in his mansion, media appearances as an example of philanthropy. Yet his arrogance grew alongside it. Whenever he crossed paths with Clara in the corridors, he made a point of throwing out venomous remarks. "Have you made the beds properly today, girl? That's all you know how to do." He'd sneer in that mocking tone that drew laughter from his bodyguards. Clara never responded, but each word was engraved in her memory, fueling her determination in silence. The turning point began to take shape one night when she was called to tidy up Arthur's office after a business meeting. In the trash, she found fragments of torn papers. Curious, she patiently pieced them together. When the document finally came together, she was stunned. It was part of a contract involving the purchase of land destined for the construction of public schools. But according to the paper, that land would be diverted into a private venture of Montero Corp. It was proof that Arthur was profiting off projects meant for the poor. Clara took a deep breath. In that moment, she knew she had found the thread that could unravel something much greater. From then on, her life changed. By day, she remained the invisible chambermaid, obedient, smiling, unnoticed. By night, at home, she studied the documents with Miguel, created spreadsheets, and began assembling a dossier. She knew it wouldn't be easy to confront a man with so much power, but she also knew no one suspected her. And it was precisely in that invisibility that Clara discovered her most powerful weapon. While Arthur boasted publicly of being untouchable, he had no idea that behind the scenes of his own hotel, the chambermaid he mocked in silence was preparing the ground for the most painful downfall of his life. From the night Clara found the contract fragments in Arthur's office, everything changed. It was no longer just about enduring humiliation. Now, she carried something much greater in her hands, a real opportunity to unmask the millionaire who despised her. In the days that followed, Clara intensified her observations. Every hallway she cleaned, every room she organized, every scrap of paper or whispered conversation she picked up became a piece of the puzzle. She knew she had to act wisely. One wrong move and she would be fired, or worse, silenced. At home, alongside Miguel, she turned her small room into a kind of improvised investigation center. Piles of documents, notebooks filled with notes, and even an old blue folder where she stored everything she collected began to accumulate. "If all this comes to light," Miguel said nervously as he examined one of the forged contracts, "Arthur could lose much more than money. He could end up behind bars. Yitikan, and that's exactly when he'll discover he isn't untouchable," Clara replied firmly. Clara's plan unfolded in 3 stages: observe, gather evidence, and expose. First, she needed to observe more closely. For that, she took advantage of her position as a chambermaid. Many times, she was called to tidy up the most expensive rooms in the hotel, the ones reserved for Arthur's private meetings with his partners. Pretending to be just the silent employee, she would put her cleaning cloth aside for a few seconds and jot down names, dates, and loose phrases she overheard. Then came the riskiest part: gathering evidence. Clara began collecting not only torn papers but also discreetly recording conversations with her phone hidden in her uniform pocket. They were short audios but revealing. Voices discussing bribes, diverted land, bribed politicians. Finally, she needed to find the right way to expose it all. She knew she couldn't simply take the material to the police. Arthur had contacts everywhere and would cover it up. It was Miguel who suggested seeking out an investigative journalist known for her courage. "Helena Duarte," he said, showing her a newspaper article. "She's already brought down corrupt businessmen and politicians. If anyone can carry this forward, it's her." Clara hesitated. Handing everything over to a stranger was risky. But the more she read about Helena, the more she realized she could trust her. Meanwhile, Arthur grew ever more convinced that he was in control. He threw lavish parties, gave interviews about his social commitment, and continued to humiliate Clara whenever he saw her. "Still here, girl?" he mocked during one encounter. "You should have already realized this isn't your place." Clara only lowered her head, but inside she smiled. He has no idea what's coming. The plan took shape when Miguel managed to arrange a secret meeting between Clara and Helena Duarte at a discreet cafe in the city. Clara arrived nervous with the blue folder in her hands. Helena, a woman with a determined gaze and firm voice, listened attentively to every word of the chambermaid. "Do you understand the risk you're taking?" the journalist asked. "Exposing someone like Arthur Montero could cost you your safety." Clara took a deep breath and replied, "I've spent my whole life being invisible. He thinks he can step on me because he believes I don't belong in this world. Maybe it's time to show everyone who really doesn't belong." Helena smiled. "Then let's do this right." From that moment on, the game was in motion. Clara, the chambermaid who had lived in the shadows for years, now had allies, evidence, and a clear goal. Arthur's downfall would not just be an act of personal revenge, but a public exposure of an empire built on arrogance and corruption. And while Arthur slept peacefully in his mansion, believing himself untouchable, the web that would trap him was already being woven silently, thread by thread, by the hands of the very woman he so deeply despised. Arthur Montero never imagined his arrogance could turn into a trap. That morning, while giving an interview about the ethical expansion of his businesses, Clara was just a few blocks away, accompanied by Helena Duarte. The journalist held in her hands a carefully organized dossier with all the evidence gathered by the chambermaid: recordings, forged documents, receipts signed under front names. The first blow came like a whisper but echoed like thunder. Helena published the report nationwide. Headline: Arthur Montero's empire built on corruption and fraud. The country stopped to watch. The millionaire who prided himself on being untouchable was now exposed on national television as a manipulator and a criminal. When the news reached Arthur, he was in his office at the hotel. The room, filled with glass and expensive marble, echoed with the sharp sound of a whiskey glass being hurled against the wall. "Who dared?" he shouted, furious, the veins in his neck bulging. His advisors, pale, didn't dare respond. But Arthur knew something was wrong. Evidence that detailed couldn't have appeared out of nowhere. Someone very close had been watching him. That same night, the hotel was filled with tension. Employees whispered in the hallways, guests murmured about the scandal. Clara walked among them with steady steps, her uniform still spotless, though her heart raced. She knew Arthur would soon realize her role, and the confrontation was inevitable. It didn't take long. Arthur summoned her to the hotel's penthouse alone. When Clara entered, he was standing before the panoramic window, looking at the city lights as if he still ruled that world. "So, it was you," he said without turning, his voice low and dripping with resentment. "The little maid I should have ignored." Clara remained calm, though her hands trembled slightly. "I didn't invent anything. I just showed the world who you really are." Arthur slowly turned, his eyes burning with rage. "You think you've won, Clara? I still have power, I still have contacts. You're nothing but an insolent servant." Clara raised her gaze, unafraid. "And even so, I managed to bring down an empire that seemed unshakable." The tension grew. Arthur took a few steps forward, trying to intimidate her. But suddenly the penthouse door burst open. Helena Duarte entered, accompanied by 2 court officers and a police inspector. "Arthur Montero," the inspector declared firmly, "you are under arrest for fraud, corruption, and money laundering." The millionaire froze, incredulous. He looked at Clara as if it were impossible that this woman, invisible for so many years, was responsible for his downfall. "This is a setup," he shouted, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. The officers handcuffed him. Camera flashes went off from the hallway, capturing every second of the fall of the man who once believed himself untouchable. Clara watched in silence. Her heart pounded, but serenity filled her expression. The woman who for years had been told she didn't belong to this world was now witnessing the ruin of the man who had used that same world to humiliate and exploit. As Arthur was taken away, still struggling, Helena approached Clara. "You made history." Clara took a deep breath. "I just showed that no one is too small to change destiny." That night, news outlets broadcast nationwide images of the millionaire being escorted by police. In the hotel hallways, no one dared look at Clara with contempt anymore. The confrontation was complete, but the story was not yet over. The hotel, once a stage for luxury and arrogance, was now plunged into silence and tension. Arthur Montero, the man who gave orders and humiliated without fear, had been taken away in handcuffs before everyone's eyes. The news spread like wildfire, filling the halls with whispers and curious glances. But for Clara, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. That night, back home, Clara opened the old blue folder. Among the torn documents and recorded audios, there was an envelope she hadn't yet had the courage to open. She had found it weeks earlier in Arthur's office safe, hidden among seemingly irrelevant papers. The envelope was yellowed with age and bore only a simple inscription: "For Clara." With trembling hands, she tore the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. As she began to read, her eyes widened. The text was from her mother, who had passed away years earlier. In the letter, a secret was revealed that Clara had never imagined. Her mother had worked decades earlier as a maid in the same hotel and had been humiliated in the very same way by Arthur. Worse still, in a secret and abusive relationship, Arthur had seduced her, promising to help her escape poverty, but abandoned her when she became pregnant. Clara let the letter fall into her lap, breathless. Arthur was not just the man who had humiliated her. He was her father. The weight of the revelation struck her like lightning. Every word of contempt, every mocking laugh, every time he had looked at her as if she were nothing. All of it now carried a new meaning. He had rejected his own daughter for years without ever acknowledging her existence. Miguel, who was beside her, read the letter in silence and held her hand. So, all of this, it was always personal, even if you didn't know it. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but beyond the pain there was also a strange sense of relief. She wasn't invisible by chance. Her struggle had always been intertwined with that man in a deeper way than she could have ever imagined. The next day, Helena Duarte sought out Clara. "Your courage has inspired thousands of people," the journalist said. "But you need to know, this secret about your mother and Arthur may come out soon. Do you want to expose that too?" Clara took a deep breath. For a moment, she thought about revealing to the world that Arthur had humiliated and rejected his own daughter. But then she looked out the window at the orange-tinged evening sky. "No," she replied firmly. "He's already destroyed by what he did to the people, by the crimes he committed. My pain is mine. I don't need to turn it into a spectacle." Helena nodded, respecting her decision. That night, Clara returned to the hotel. She walked through the hallways as she always had, but this time she was no longer invisible. The employees looked at her with respect, some even with admiration. Helena, her fellow maid and best friend, ran to her and hugged her. "You did it, Clara. You silenced that man and showed that we have a voice, too." Clara smiled. "It wasn't just for me. It was for everyone he tried to crush." Before leaving, she went up to the penthouse where it had all begun. The hall still bore the remnants of Arthur's last party. Clara walked to the panoramic window and looked out at the city lights. She felt a mix of victory and melancholy. Justice had been done, but the scar of her origin would never disappear. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I don't belong to this world, Arthur. Then it was in this very world that I proved you wrong." With steady steps, she left the hotel. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her. Clara knew her life would never be the same again. She was no longer just a maid. She was the woman who had brought down an empire and faced her own past. And though the revelation of her origin was a heavy burden, it was also a reminder that even the darkest stories could become weapons of courage. Arthur had lost everything: fortune, prestige, and power. Clara, on the other hand, had gained something no amount of money could ever buy: the certainty that she was greater than any humiliation she had endured. The months that followed were like a long journey. Arthur Montero, once feared and respected, now lived behind bars. Newspapers covered every hearing, every sentence, and the world watched the downfall of the millionaire who once believed he was above everyone. Clara, on the other hand, saw her life transformed. She no longer walked through the hotel corridors like an ignored shadow. The employees, who once looked at her with disdain, now greeted her with genuine respect. Many even whispered quietly, "You gave us courage." But despite the apparent victory, Clara carried within herself the most bitter revelation. Arthur was her father. This truth was never told to anyone beyond Miguel and Helena Duarte. To the world, she was simply the maid who stood up to a powerful businessman. To herself, she was the rejected daughter who finally brought down the man who had marked her with contempt since their very first encounter. On a Sunday morning, Clara walked to the cemetery where her mother was buried. In her hands, she held the letter that had revealed everything. Kneeling before the simple headstone, she touched it gently and whispered, "Mother, he never saw me as a daughter, but I managed to show the world that I am not invisible. I honored your pain, and now I can move on in peace." Miguel, always by her side, squeezed her hand. "You turned a story of suffering into a story of courage." Clara looked to the horizon and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She no longer needed anyone's validation. Her life was not defined by humiliation, but by how she chose to respond to it. In time, Clara left the hotel. Not out of fear or shame, but because it was time to build something new. With Helena Duarte's help, she began working at an NGO that supported women in vulnerable situations. She used her story as proof that even the invisible could change destinies. Arthur's words, "You don't belong in this world," still echoed in her mind, but now they carried a different meaning. Clara understood that she never belonged to the world of arrogance and corruption, but to the world of dignity, resilience, and hope. The last time she was mentioned in the newspapers, she was no longer the maid from the luxury hotel. She was introduced as Clara Montero, the woman who faced her own father's empire and brought it down with evidence, courage, and relentless silence. And for those watching from the outside, the lesson was clear. No power is absolute. No humiliation defines who you are. Even the despised have the strength to change the course of history. Clara went on with her life knowing that true wealth was not found in gold, mansions, or titles. It was found in the courage to stand tall when everyone else wanted you to remain on your knees. And so, the maid, who was once humiliated, became the living symbol that no one is ever too small to silence giants.